Brian, how was your flight in? Looks like we got one viewer.
It was good. It was uneventful.
That's
Other than
always
that,
a plus.
other than a little bit later than planned, but the flight getting into Charlotte was late, so it pushed mine back. So,
Oh, yeah. Well, you made it just in time. I'm glad.
yep, just in time. My backup plan was to call one of my teammates if it really got messed up, but I was crossing my fingers it was going to work out. So.
Gotcha, understand.
I think Randy Knight or Michael Hampton, one of them told me they knew Janet real well.
Okay.
So
I think I recognized Randy Knight before, actually. He's been around the industry for a while.
oh yeah, he's been around a while.
All right. Well, I'll go ahead and get this kicked off. Welcome, everybody. I'm Justin. I'm with DNL Farm and Home here in North Texas. Joined today with Brian Hupp with Central Life Sciences. Give us a little talk about IGR or feed through fly control. Do want to remind you today we are going to have some door prizes. We're going to give away a 55-pound Purina Equitub, a bag of Wind and Rain IGR loose mineral, and also a Purina High Octane Clarify show supplement. For tuning in today, you're also going to get a $15 coupon just for coming in to say hi for the door prizes. If you would, make sure you're going to comment below or in the messenger chat that we have going for what town you live in and what species of animal you have. So without further ado, Brian, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you, Justin. I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for spending your lunch hour or afternoon with us. My name is Brian Hupp. I'm with Central Life Sciences. I live in Raymore, Missouri, and I have national account responsibility. I'm a national account manager, and so it means I cover coast to coast, border to border for both Alticid and Clarifly. We're going to talk a little bit about both today. Basically, I want to kind of give just a fly 101. Talk about integrated pest management, or as we refer to in the short version called IPM, to kind of give you some tools and ideas for getting better fly control around your livestock, and more specifically, obviously, the offerings that we have with Purina that contain both Alticid and Clarifly. So, without further ado, I'm going to try to go ahead here and see if I can't get a slideshow here put up real quick. That way, it'll keep me on track as we go along here, and so that I don't take up too much of your time, and make sure that I cover all the items that I wanted to get covered. So we're going to go ahead and do that here if I can get it pulled up. Well, it says that I can't because the file is too big. So we'll just have a good old fashioned fireside chat here without the PowerPoint, which is fine as well. So first of all, obviously, Alticid is our product that is focused on pasture cattle, and it is focused more exactly on the horn fly. So when we think about livestock flies that we commonly find around livestock, there's four most common flies that you're going to think of. Number one's a house fly. Obviously, everybody's familiar with the old-fashioned house fly. It hangs around the house, barns, around confined animals. Secondly, we have a stable fly. It is also what we would consider a premise fly or a confinement fly. You're going to find it around exactly how it's named, around the stables, around the barns, around the house, around confined animals is mainly where you're going to find the stable fly. And then we also have a face fly and a horn fly. Those would be what we call our pasture flies. Now, luckily for y'all in Texas, face flies really aren't an issue. Face flies are more of a northern thing. So when I say northern, anywhere north of I-40. So I-40 cuts through Oklahoma City, Little Rock, Nashville, kind of give you an idea in the country where I'm talking about with I-40. Anywhere north of that, you deal with face flies. You probably really don't have very many of those in Texas, which is nice. So those are your four most common flies that you're going to find around cattle. The horn fly specifically is like I said, a pasture fly, and it's the most costly external parasite to pasture cattle by far. It's not even close of any other external parasite to pasture cattle. It costs the industry over $1 billion per year. On average, we're looking at about $40 per head. That's what the data says in losses on your cattle in your operation if you don't do anything about the horn flies on your cattle. So obviously very costly. Nobody wants to lose that on average $40. If you think about every single year and some of the things when it comes to your operation with pastured cattle, there's a lot of things that we have that are out of our control when it comes to running a cattle operation and whether how profitable it's going to be. If you just watch the news, there's a lot of things going on that we have no control over. We have no control over wars. We have no control over inflation, cattle prices. We have no control over fertilizer costs, input costs, feed costs. We have no control over the weather, whether we're going to have rain and have enough grass for cattle, or if we're going to have enough to be able to cut hay to get us through the winter. All these things are all things that are huge factors in our business, but we have no control over. However, every single year, and you're more aware of this than a lot of people because you live in a warmer climate, and that's the fly season. Flies have happened every single year. Every spring they come out, and then they start here, and those horn flies start taking blood meals, 30 to 40 blood meals a day on those cattle all day, all night. They stay on those animals and take blood meals. And they do this from the time they come out when the temperature starts getting over 60 to 65 degrees in the spring. They do this all summer until the fall when the temperatures no longer start reaching over 65 during the day, and then they hibernate for the next spring. So those horn flies are very costly. If we don't do anything about them, we can count that in. We can figure in that $40 in losses from those horn flies if we don't do anything about the horn flies. Now, on the flip side, obviously there's a lot of different things that we can do about horn flies on pasture cattle. A lot of different products. My company sells some of them. I'm sure DNL has several of our Star Bar line of products like Prolate and Crop Spray, and a new product that we have called Inhibitor that's a pour-on. We've got all types of different products you can put in oilers and back rubbers, and we've got a lot of different products that you can kill an adult horn fly on the back of a cow with. And I will never tell you that those products aren't good. However, you just need to understand they're just one of the tools in your toolbox. And I really like to promote any type of adulticide that's used as a topical on an animal, hopefully more or less as a rescue type treatment. We don't want that to be the end all be all for our fly control program, because when you start using adulticides, we have very limited amount of active ingredients that the EPA allows us to use on an animal that's going to run off into the environment and into the soil. And so we need to make sure that we're good stewards of those products and we don't build resistance to them, because if you use a product, an adulticide, over and over and over, you will build a resistance to it, especially if you don't change up those chemicals or those active ingredients. So use them sparingly as much as possible. And then on the flip side, obviously we want to stop those flies from developing in the manure. The one nice thing about horn flies is the only place that a horn fly can lay eggs is in fresh cattle manure. It cannot be horse manure. It can't be that old rotting hay that's begun to become an organic matter. That house flies and stable flies can lay eggs in that, but a horn fly cannot. A horn fly has to have fresh manure. So if you're turning cows out into a pasture with old manure pats, those are not breeding sites for a horn fly. You don't have to worry about those. It's got to be fresh manure. The data will tell you that it's 5 minutes or less, that manure, after it comes out of the back end of that animal, that horn fly has a chance to lay those eggs, because it gets a hard enough glaze on it that female horn fly can't penetrate after that. Now, I don't know who figured that out. Some grad student somewhere. It was a crappy job, pun intended. Okay. But anyway, the idea is it's got to be fresh manure. So we have a captive audience with horn flies to control them with a product like Alticid that's a feed through that you can find in the Wind and Rain Mineral, both in a loose version as well as a tub. They also have it in some liquid options as well if you wanted to go that route on the supplement side of things. But when it comes down to mineral, obviously both the loose and the tub are the options that you want to go with to achieve administering Alticid to that animal so it goes out the rear end and stops those flies from developing in the manure. So Alticid works really, really well. We just did a 90-day demo program in the Southeast last year. Had 25,000 cows on it. Over 90% of the participants said that they were satisfied with their fly control, and about 96% said they were going to purchase it the following year and continue to use it. Had great results out of it. And here's the kicker: when that 90-day promo was used on top of a 90-day mineral trial that Purina does to track consumption, it shows that Alticid works very, very well. The key to Alticid working is consistent intake. You've got to have a mineral source that's out there that those cows will eat and that they'll eat on a consistent basis so that we don't have untreated manure pats. One single horn fly will lay 500 eggs in a lifetime. All right. Now that lifetime is only 2 to 3 weeks. So it's a very short amount of time. One single horn fly is laying that many eggs. We don't just have one fly in a pasture. We have hundreds to thousands of them laying those eggs. And so if you have a few days where those cows run out of mineral and you have untreated manure pats, your population can build again. So we want to make sure that we stay consistent on that. We want to make sure that we're doing our job as producers to make sure we have enough mineral feeders out there for the number of cows you have in a pasture. And number two, that we put those mineral feeders in places that those cows are going to frequent. Where you have your mineral feeder now will not be the same place that those cows probably frequent come when it gets hot, and then again in the fall and even over the winter. So if they're not eating enough, we need to move that mineral feeder closer to the water source or to those loafing areas. If they're eating too much, we need to move it away from that. Do not cut it with salt. All right. The loose mineral version that Purina has already has salt included. That is at a level to make sure those cows eat enough and also not eat too much. So don't cut it with salt because that'll dilute the Alticid in the amount of mineral that those cows consume. We want to make sure they're getting the right amount in there. The other cool thing about with Purina is Purina has their minerals formulated for a 1,400-pound cow. We don't have the industry as a whole had always been based off of a 1,000-pound cow. We don't have very many 1,000-pound cows anymore. Most of them are 12, 13, 14, 1,500 pounds. And so Purina has changed, this is about 4 or 5 years ago, changed their formulation to recognize that and base their 4-ounce mineral intake off of that. That means they also have Alticid in there at a 1,400-pound cow level, where not every company is doing that. And one of the main reasons why they don't is because that's 40% more Alticid, and that makes their mineral more expensive. Whereas Purina is doing the right thing for you as a producer and put it in at the right dose rate so that those cows get the right amount of Alticid and get the proper horn fly control that you're trying to achieve when you purchase a product like that. So consistent intake, really, really important. Purina's got great data on consistent intake. If for some reason your cows won't eat loose mineral in a certain pasture, every once in a while that happens. There's some antagonists in a pasture that cause cows not to do that. Try their tub. Guaranteed those cows will eat those tubs, and it's a great way to get both the mineral nutrition that those cows very much need as well as Alticid. So you're probably thinking, well, Brian, what's that going to cost me? What does Alticid cost? And how does it compare to ear tags, sprays, pour-ons, and some of the other fly control products that we can use? Alticid costs you 3 cents per head per day. If you were to calculate out how often you need to spray to be able to keep the fly numbers underneath the 200 fly threshold per cow, it's going to cost you about 3 cents per head per day if you were to use a spray or a pour-on or a back rubber or even ear tags. Okay, and that's not including the labor that takes and the time that it takes to apply those other products. Alticid, we're going to allow that cow to do the fly control for us, spreading Alticid through the manure, where we know that that's the only place that those horn flies are going to lay eggs, and we can stop those flies from becoming adult flies. So 3 cents per head per day roughly comes out to about 90 cents a month per head. So if you think about your fly season, you probably have, probably 2 months maybe where you don't have flies in your area, maybe 3 months. So you're probably looking at $8 or $9 per head to do fly control with Alticid in the Purina Win and Rain mineral. Now, that sounds like a lot, but if we juxtapose that against the $40 in losses that we know the data tells us that horn flies cost us in blood loss, reduced weight gains, weaning weight impacts of calves of about 20 pounds, about 30 pounds of weaning weight difference on stockers or in yearlings if we're putting weight on them. reduce milk production, milk yields, milk quality. There's some data out there showing that mastitic cows, because of horn flies, cause mastitis on, especially on young heifers, can cause issues of more days open, making it harder for the to get these heifers bred. And then once they're bred, there's also a higher chance of abortion as well. So there's a lot of things that horn flies do that cause a negative impact on cattle, and that's about $40 on average per head. And so when we think about $40 per head versus in losses versus spending 8 or 9 to reverse that and getting $30+ back, that makes a whole lot of sense, and that math works even in today's time. And that difference that you get back from those horn flies not sucking the blood and those losses out of your cattle can be put back into feeding mineral and other things, or something you can put back in your pocket. So there's a whole lot of financial incentives to use in a product like Alticid or horn fly control in general. Now, horn flies and flies in general are directly related to rainfall. The more moisture you have, the more flies you're going to have. The more dry you have, the less flies you're going to have. So you will see some peaks and valleys in the number of flies out there. But as long as we're keeping them at least at that 200 fly threshold per cow or less, we're doing a good job on our cows. Now, how do you count flies? Obviously, that's kind of a hard thing to do. The best way I can tell you on whether you're doing a good job on your pasture cattle fly control with horn flies is basically based off the behavior of those cattle. Are they bunched up in the corner of the fence line? Do they have their tail going a lot? Are they slinging their head back? Are they stomping? Are they carrying on? Are they just irritated by those horn flies? Or are they more comfortable grazing spread out in the pasture and doing what you want them to do? And basically is a cow comfort thing. That's what we're doing when it comes to fly control. And so that's the best way to tell if you're getting good control on your fly control. Now, we always want to get started early on our fly control. Obviously, you probably already have flies. We have had a kind of a late winter into spring this year, but I'm sure you're starting to see some horn flies already. If you haven't started on Alticid, you can get started. Just know that if there's already flies present, it's going to be about 3 to 4 weeks before you start seeing a difference in the number of flies on the backs of those cows, unless you go out there and apply some type of topical to speed up that process, because those adult flies are already present before you started. They're going to live 2 to 3 weeks. And then the manure that was that has development in it before you started Alticid also has about another week before those flies emerge out of there as well as adults. So it's about a 3 to 4 week wait time before you're going to see a difference. Then we want to feed it long into the fall, because that's the time that those flies are going to produce a lot, to make sure that they have enough flies for overwintering for next spring. So we want to feed it late into the fall, 30 days past your first frost, to ensure that we have less flies overwintering, because those flies overwinter in the pupa stage, which is the last stage before they become an adult fly. Alticid stops those flies going into the pupa stage. So we're going to have less flies overwintering for next year, and you're going to get a head start and have less flies come out the next year to start with. It's all a percentage game. We have to prove that Alticid can control 95% of the horn flies. That's what the EPA requires us to be able to prove, to put that we control horn flies on the label for Alticid. So that means there's about 5% that don't get controlled. So when you think about that, it's all a percentage game. 5% of 1,000 is way different than 5% of 10,000 or even 100,000. So we want to make sure we're controlling a small amount of flies, and that allows the flies to stay low. Now, I didn't really get into Clarifly yet. Clarifly is a great product. Clarifly, we've really focused. It can be used in pasture, but it's really been focused on confinement animals. So, closer to the barn, stable, smaller paddocked areas, like for a horse. Purina's got the EquiTub product that's got Clarifly in there, does a great job on house flies and stable flies. You don't really have to worry about horn flies, and they will get on horses, but they're coming from cattle manure, not from horse manure. That EquiTub and that Clarifly does an excellent job on fly control. They've also got Clarifly in a sheep and goat mineral and a balancer, as well as in the high octane show supplement. That's a multi-species that can be used on cattle, swine, sheep, and goat as well. So that's a great option. If you've got show animals, you're hand feeding them, you want to do a top dress, it's a great option to be able to get that fly control into those animals and achieve the horn or fly control that you want in those confined situations, especially in the show arena. So we own the Star Bar brands, as I talked about. When we talk about an IPM program, integrated pest management, the first level of an IPM program would be you want to take away all the places that those flies can lay eggs, that's not manure. So when I said earlier, old hay, organic matter, wet feeds, things like that, if you leave those sitting around, or old manure piles, a housefly and stable fly are a lot more opportunistic than a hornfly. They'll go lay eggs in those places as well. So if we can clean up, take care of things sanitation wise, keep things clean around those animals, don't leave piles of manure for more than a week where those flies can develop and then emerge, you're gonna be a lot happier with your fly control. Then the next stage would be to use Clarifly in those situations, along with making sure we're keeping things cleaned up as much as possible. Now, depending on your situation and your neighbors, now a housefly and a stable fly can fly 4 to 8 miles. They can migrate a long way, whereas a hornfly cannot. A hornfly is going to stay very host specific on that animal because it does all of its eating, breeding, right there on that animal. That housefly and stable fly can fly farther. So if you have neighbors with animals, and you're worried about those flies coming over, you may want to use some sticky traps, some scatter baits, some other type things around those animals, that our Starbar line has available to you to be able to use in conjunction with Clarifly in keeping things cleaned up. So that's what we mean by an integrated pest management. Sometimes the situation dictates that you may need to use more than just the feed through fly control, and that's okay. But hopefully in most situations, using the feed through fly control is all that you should need for those animals to be able to achieve the fly control that you want. So Clarifly works in a similar way as Alticid. It's a feed through. It's not systemic, doesn't get in the meat or blood or even in the milk. It stops the flies in a little bit different way in the manure, but it stops them earlier in the process than Alticid. So both of them are going to stop that fly from becoming an adult fly, and that's really the key behind both of them. Clarifly is going to be just a tad bit more expensive than Alticid, but also very economically useful as well, and especially compared to spraying and doing some of the other things that those spray systems can get very expensive in a show barn as well. So another economic way to control house flies, stable flies, horn flies in those environments, and does an excellent job on it. So I've done about 23 minutes. It's about 3 minutes longer than I wanted to take of your time. I will stay on if there's any questions. I'll answer any of those. And I appreciate your time today. Thank you to DNL for having this and for having me on.
Thanks, Brian. I actually got a couple of questions. I was kind of watching the chat while we were talking here. But I had a couple of questions for you. So I know you've got to kind of it's a preventative care with IGRs, but I remember talking and doing some studies back when I was in school and kind of where we draw the line now. How do you know you have a hornfly problem? Can you talk about that just a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of go back to the behaviors of the animal. I mean, that's the whole idea behind doing hornfly controls. It's a cow comfort thing. These animals are less stressed, more comfortable. They're going to perform better, and if they perform better, they're going to be more profitable. And so the best way is, you can drive up and down country roads and see cattle bunched up in the fence line. That's what cows do when they're really stressed out from horn flies. They try to get up next to their buddy to hopefully rub some of those horn flies off of them. You see them kind of kicking at themselves, stomping. They got their heads slinging back, trying to get those flies off their shoulders and off their back and their tails. Those are the telltale signs of a horn fly problem. You can kind of get a general idea. If you just have horn flies in a couple areas on the shoulders and backs, you're probably underneath that 200 fly threshold. When they start getting down the sides and on the bellies, you've got too many flies on those cows. And so, as you're showing here on this webinar, Purina's got a great calculator on their website for you to go in there, kind of figure out, hey, how many flies do I think I have based off of those dots on the backs of those cows, and then pick what region you're in and how many cattle you have. And it's going to give you a great idea of how many blood meals and how much stress is taking place on those animals. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And then I had one other. So I've got a lot of my guys who last year, this year have decided that they're going to do an IGR program year round and not take off our, just our fly season. It's Texas. I mean, it's
Yeah.
maybe December, maybe January is not fly season, but everything else is. So, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so the great thing about Alticid is we've been using Alticid for about 30 years in this industry. Methoprene is the active ingredient in Alticid, and there's no documented resistance to it. The way that methoprene works on that undeveloped fly is it's mimicking the growth hormone in that process, and so that fly thinks it's already produced that hormone to move on to the next life stage, into the pupa stage, and it has not, so it just dies in the manure that way. So there's no resistance buildup because it's not like a toxic kill like an adulticide where you build a resistance to it. So there is no problem with feeding it year round. And to what I'm glad you brought this up, Justin, because most people south of I-40, we pretty much recommend year round because if you start going by the 30-30 rule that we have, start 30 days before your last frost in the spring. Well, for you, your last frost is probably March 15th on any given year, given maybe 15 or 30 days on either side of that. Maybe it was a little bit later this year because it's been kind of a bad winter. But if we go 15 or 30 days before that, you're at Valentine's Day. So I like to make the joke, hey, that's time to get the girls a present, get them fly control started on Valentine's Day. Now, if you go 30 days past your first frost in the fall, your first frost date's probably Thanksgiving-ish. You go 30 days past that, you're into Christmas. So how much time do you have between Christmas and Valentine's Day? About 45 days. Maybe
There's
it's 60 days at the most. You don't need to be doing fly control. Well, that becomes an inventory issue in your barns and what you keep on hand there at your farm. And so it makes it just easier to just bite the bullet for that extra month and a half and just feed fly control year round. And especially if you're going to have some of those 65-degree days in North Texas in December. And you may have some flies emerge at that time and they're going to start laying eggs. And so we want to make sure we're taking care of them as well so that in the spring the population doesn't explode. So I'm glad you brought that up. It's pretty much a year-round program for Texas and for anyone south of I-40.
okay. Yep. We had one question come in. So the primary element of an integrated fly program, would you say that's the feed through first and then the traps or topicals?
Yeah. First one is cleanup. Second one's going to be Clarifly or Alticid. Third one's going to be traps, adulticides. That's your last one that you want to try to use are the adulticides. Traps can go in there with the especially in confined areas, they can go in at the same time as Clarifly technically on an IPM program because they're not adulticides. But yeah, you want to make sure you use an adulticide and topicals at last resort.
Okay. I think I had one more question from Janet there too.
Oh, good question. Benefits. Yep, I see that on there. Beneficial wasps such as fly predators. Great question. So those also are part of an IPM program. They're going to work better in a confinement situation, but they're not going to be the end all be all. But Clarifly works great with them. If you think about the fly predator wasps, they're kind of the cleanup crew behind Clarifly. They're going to get some of those undeveloped flies and maybe some of those areas that don't get cleaned up as well as you think they might, or Clarifly may not be. So they work really well in conjunction, and Clarifly will not harm those fly predators. So that's a great question. If you think about some of the other beneficial insects in a pasture, Alticid does not harm a dung beetle. The dung beetle is your friend in the pasture as well. That manure pat for a hornfly, one of the reasons why you don't see hornflies developing in confined situations is a manure pat for a hornfly has to stay intact through the whole life cycle for it to develop and emerge as an adult fly. In a confined situation, obviously, cattle are stomping up those stomping and breaking up those manure pats. to where those flies aren't going to develop. In a pasture, those dung beetles are tearing apart that manure. If you have a good dung beetle population in a pasture, they're going to tear up that manure pat within 13, 14, 24 hours and roll it up into balls and stick it down in the ground for you, basically helping you out in your fly control because it's tearing apart those manure pads for you. So Alticid does not harm dung beetles as well. So it's okay for beneficial insects as well. Good questions.
Looks like we got another one, Brian. Our horses and cows are pastured together. Is Alticid safe for the horses?
Yeah, obviously that's pretty common. Alticid is, and the EPA doesn't like us to use the word safe, but yes, it is okay. It would be safe for a horse if they were to eat it. It will not help them on their fly control because it's a horn fly product, but it wouldn't hurt them if they were to have some.
Outstanding. Well, I think that's all the questions we've gotten so far. Brian, thank you very much for coming to talk to us, and thank all of you guys out there that are listening to us today. If you have any questions, the chat will probably be going a little bit. Always feel free to email us at DNL. We can definitely get you some information to follow up if you have any questions. Remember, if you haven't done it already, I'm not sure who's all watching, but if you haven't commented, make sure you let us know what town you live in and what species you have for our door prizes. We will be drawing those later, so we won't be announcing them on here. So, Brian, thanks again. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Justin. I appreciate everybody. Hey, if you're not following us, Central Life Sciences, Alticid, Clarifly on social medias, make sure you do that. We've got a lot of informative stuff on there as well. And always reach out to DNL. They're a great partner of ours and a great resource to you as well. And if they don't have the answer for you, they can reach out to us, and we'd be more than happy to help out in any way possible. So have a great weekend, everybody.
Thank you, Brian. Take care.
Thanks.